The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Melvin Goodman spent 42 years in the U.S. intelligence community and says there's no doubt about Russian interference in the election. David Cay Johnston just got hold of 2 pages of Trump's taxes, but in a special encore presentation of his appearance here last fall, he reviews 30 years of the president's fishy finances. And Bill Press talks with Congressman Don Beyer about the congressional agenda and Virginia politics. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight, and follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Former intelligence analyst and Russia expert Melvin Goodman says Trump eventually will have to realize that Vladimir Putin is no friend of the United States. And we say hello to Melvin Goodman, senior fellow at the Center for International Policy in Washington, D.C. He's an adjunct professor of international relations at Johns Hopkins University. His 42-year government career included tours at the CIA, State, and Defense Departments. And his latest book is Whistleblower at the CIA, an insider's account of the politics of intelligence. Melvin Goodman, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be with you.
Nice to have you with us. Your book is a story of U.S. intelligence failures, but isn't the problem really in the way intelligence is used by elected officials and not necessarily the way it's collected and analyzed?
Well, it's a little bit of everything in all of these matters. Vietnam is a classic case of the misuse of intelligence by policymakers. Intelligence made it clear that strategic bombing against Vietnam was not going to work, that there was no government in South Vietnam that could function as an ally toward the United States. There was indeed going to be a failure. So here, when you look at Vietnam, you can say it was a tremendous intelligence success, but an incredible policy failure. When you look at intelligence failures generally, there are 2 kinds. One, politicization, and that is someone from outside the CIA, for example, the Reagan administration in the 1980s, wants to draw a picture of a very strong Soviet Union 10 feet tall, when the fact of the matter is in the 1980s, the Soviet Union was in decline. But you had a CIA director, Casey, and a deputy, Robert Gates, who saluted the president and started to spin the intelligence. 9/11 is another case of very good intelligence. 9/11 should not have happened. It wasn't politicization. It was just blunder on the part of intelligence analysts who didn't look closely enough at the intelligence that made it clear that al-Qaeda not only wanted to attack U.S. interests abroad, but he was really going after U.S. interests in the United States itself. And finally, when you look at the classic failure, which was Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, phony intelligence was created to enable this country to go to war. And not that this has not happened before. If you look at the Mexican-American War in the 1840s, the Spanish-American War in the 1890s, Vietnam, and how we went to war, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. These were all manufactured cases of phony intelligence to justify a war. That's why you need very rigid oversight of the intelligence community, which you don't have now in the Congress. You don't have strong, active oversight committees in the House or the Senate, and President Obama is responsible for weakening oversight within the CIA, weakening the Office of the Inspector General. So the picture is not a healthy one at the current time.
You and Trump share a great deal of disdain for the U.S. intelligence community, but probably from different angles. Where does he get it right and where does he get it wrong?
Well, I regret the fact that Donald Trump and I agree on something. I'll consider this a factor of serendipity and not a factor of analysis, because I don't think Trump gets any of these intelligence issues correct. He has talked about politicization, and he's right about that. But the politicization of 2002 and 2003 and the run-up to the Iraq War really is not germane to the current situation that involves Russian interference in the American election, Russian hacking against the Democratic National Committee, very clever Russian leaking of materials to WikiLeaks, where you had Julian Assange trying to make sure that Hillary Clinton was not elected president of the United States in 2016. So he's sort of right in calling about previous acts of politicization, but they have no bearing on the current situation we're looking at right now, where the evidence is overwhelming that the United States suffered from a cyber attack from Russia, led by an individual who was not concerned with U.S. reaction to this incredibly aggressive act. And this is what I find quite terrifying, that I don't think is being understood. The Soviet Union always drew the line at this kind of direct covert action that would be aimed at American elections in a very specific way. Putin not only gave the word to conduct this kind of covert action, what the Russians call active measures, but he clearly had no concern that there would be a strong American response in return. And of course, he was right. This was a gamble that he won, because I think the White House was derelict in getting information in the summer of 2015 that was not acted on until after the election of November 2016. So we still don't have a good explanation for all the time that was lost between July 2015, when the FBI discovered the hacking, and we had information from British intelligence that summer as well, until November and December of 2016, when we finally acted on that information.
You, of course, are an expert on Russia, and Trump is clearly in cahoots with Putin, it would seem. What do you predict will be the relationship between the U.S. and Russia in the coming years?
Well, I think it's too strong to say Trump is in cahoots with Putin. I don't think we have any idea what the substance is of that relationship. Clearly, Putin has said good things about Trump, mainly because Putin had nothing but contempt for Hillary Clinton, wanted to make sure that she was not elected president, felt that she had interfered in the Russian parliamentary election in 2011, 2012, and her people had interfered in Ukraine in 2013 and 2014. So we don't really know what this relationship is going to be about. And given Putin's efforts to make Russia a very important player in the international community, even Trump is going to have to realize that Putin is no ally. He's no friend of the United States. That doesn't mean we can't deal with Russia. I think Trump is right that we have to find a way to restore the dialogue. And I think the Barack Obama administration went too far in making sure there were no contacts with Russians during the last few years. The Defense Department hasn't allowed its individuals to hold talks with their counterparts. John Kerry, the Secretary of State, has been alone in trying to keep alive a relationship with his counterpart, the Russian foreign minister. So the dialogue does have to be restored, but it has to be restored with a sense that Putin is not trying to enhance the American position in the international arena. He looks at the international arena as a zero-sum game, that any gain for Putin or Russian interests is a setback for the United States. And this is a key to a lot of Putin's thinking in the geopolitical arena. And I don't know if the Trump administration understands this, and you have too many inexperienced people. Classic case would be a Secretary of State from Exxon who's never worked in this environment before. And then on the other hand, you have military people who will be worst-case advocates and probably go too far in challenging Russia where it isn't necessary. The fact of the matter is Russia and the United States agree on some major matters dealing with arms control, with disarmament, with terrorism, with proliferation, and on these areas we need dialogue.
You are highly critical of the government's penchant for secrecy. Shouldn't much of the intelligence product be secret? I mean, what should not be?
Well, there's too much secrecy. There's too much classification. In many ways, there's too much collection. There's too much information. And I think we learned that from the massive surveillance conducted by the National Security Agency, the secrets that were exposed by Edward Snowden. We really learned nothing from massive surveillance, but yet we violated the constitutional rights of the American people, and that needs to be understood. And I don't think we've reacted sufficiently to these unconstitutional acts. There are certain sources and certain methods that need to be protected. If we have agents in sensitive areas, we have to protect their identity. We can't compromise these individuals. If we have sensitive collection facilities, particularly communications intercepts or signals intercept, I don't think that knowledge needs to be shared with the American public, or certainly not with foreign governments. But a lot of the information we collect can be shared with the American people, who have a right to know important aspects of American international diplomacy so they can be good citizens, so they know how to take a stand on American foreign policy issues, so they know how to vote in significant elections. But clearly too much is secret. I see this in the way the CIA examines manuscripts, such as my own, for publication, where they have a double standard. If you praise the CIA, you get your manuscript through in a matter of days. If you're critical of the CIA, it can take months and even a year to get a manuscript approved by the CIA. And this is wrong.
We're speaking with Melvin Goodman, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy, also an adjunct professor of international relations at Johns Hopkins University. And his latest book is Whistleblower at the CIA, an insider's account of the politics of intelligence. Melvin, what's the Obama administration record on transparency and protection of whistleblowers?
Well, the Obama report card is going to have failing grades on the areas of transparency and on protecting the rights of whistleblowers. The whistleblower issue is particularly egregious because in the campaign of 2007-2008, Obama clearly became a supporter of the rights of whistleblowers. But Obama has used the Espionage Act against whistleblowers and against leakers, even against journalists, more than all presidents combined since the Espionage Act was passed during World War I 100 years ago. So this is extremely regrettable. Whistleblowers shouldn't be treated as people taking part in espionage or taking part in treason against the United States. I find in my study of whistleblowers that whistleblowers, in terms of what they've revealed, have been vindicated. Daniel Ellsberg was certainly vindicated with regard to the Vietnam War. Edward Snowden has been called a public servant by former Attorney General Eric Holder. So on whistleblowers, the record is particularly bad. On transparency, again, this has been a very secretive administration. This is an administration that's really circled the wagons around the White House, has not even used its own cabinet officials successfully. And granted, he's made very bad appointments to his cabinet. John Kerry is the exception to that. I think he's been an outstanding Secretary of State. But if you look at people such as Leon Panetta and the current Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, these have been very weak individuals. Keeping Robert Gates on as Secretary of Defense was an extremely poor maneuver on the part of President Obama. So again, I think there is a dark side to the Obama legacy, and it's this area of transparency and in the failure to protect whistleblowers.
And probably no reason to see that there's going to be improvement over the next 4 years.
No, in fact, I think the problem is the weak areas of the Obama legacy are going to be exploited by Donald Trump and make it easier for Trump to further malign the interests of the United States. And a perfect example would be in the area of torture and abuse. Obama did not go far enough in dealing with the problems of torture and abuse. He stopped it, but there was no accountability for the people who conducted it, who went way beyond what the Justice Department talked about as permissible. And even those memos that were written at the Justice Department were quite questionable to begin with. But the CIA went far beyond what those memos talked about, and then even destroyed the torture tapes, which was clear obstruction of justice, for which, again, there was no accountability. So without that accountability, it becomes a lot easier for Donald Trump, who thinks the idea of waterboarding is a great idea, who has talked about restoring torture and abuse. So there are a lot of areas where I think Donald Trump can exploit the weak areas of the Obama legacy, and this is something I genuinely worry about.
Melvin Goodman, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy, Adjunct Professor of International Relations at Johns Hopkins University, and his latest book, Whistleblower at the CIA, An Insider's Account of the Politics of Intelligence. Melvin, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We do look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be with you.
Nice to be with you as well. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure.
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. David Cay Johnston has spent years investigating Trump, and in an encore presentation from the presidential campaign, he reminds us of the abundant evidence that the president is a tax cheat. More on that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
You know what our country needs right now? I think we need something that can bring us together again, something that can heal the raw wound of deep political division imperiling our society. And guess what? One company has come out with just the balm America needs, an ad for a luxury automobile. Seriously? Yes, the cultural bridge builders at Cadillac have produced an advertising campaign intended not only to sell its pricey cars, but also to heal America's social divide. How? By reminding TV audiences about everyone's desire to achieve the American dream, as symbolized, of course, by the status symbol of owning a Cadillac. Seriously? Yes. The ad begins with a stark declaration. We are a nation divided. That's what they tell us. Then Cadillac's ad suddenly shifts gears, gliding into an uplifting, touchy-feely montage of all in this together inclusiveness. We carry each other forward, the narrator purrs, no matter who we are or what we believe. Mustering all of the modesty you would expect from a Cadillac executive, the corporation's marketing head explains that we didn't want to enter the political debate, we wanted to transcend it. Ah, yes, and how better to go beyond rancorous political disharmony than to drive away from it in a luxury car. This is Jim Hightower saying, the corporate honchos tried out this message on an unbiased audience of Texas Cadillac dealers. And guess what? They loved it. One dealer gushed that the ad identifies the ultra-expensive car with, quote, unity, optimism, courage. Seriously? Yes, apparently Cadillac thinks the right and left, the rich and poor, can all become e pluribus unum again by unifying around America's new egalitarian slogan, a $100,000 car in every garage.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. The journalist who got 2 pages of Trump's 2005 tax return, David Cay Johnston, says the president is likely not only a tax cheat, but a longtime friend of the mob. This is a reprise of an interview we did during the last campaign. And we say hello to David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter who's written for the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, among other papers. He has covered Donald Trump for more than 30 years and is the author of a new book called The Making of Donald Trump. David Cay Johnston, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Glad to be here.
And we appreciate your time with us. You are somewhat of an expert on taxes and how people get around paying them. Do you think Donald Trump is guilty of tax fraud?
Well, that's a conclusion I don't want to quite get to. What I'll tell you is I think there's abundant evidence that Donald has cheated on his taxes. Donald may well pay zero income taxes because there are special rules for full-time real estate professionals that allow them to live tax-free. And there's a saying among lawyers in this area, if you're a big real estate family and you're paying income taxes, you should sue your lawyer for malpractice. On the other hand, Donald has a long history of filing inconsistent documents, making claims that don't stand up to scrutiny, and that includes in tax returns. His 1984 New York State and New York City tax returns were audited. He showed that his occupation was business consultant. He filed what's called a Schedule C, and for the city, an unincorporated return with no income. No income on that. That is his whole return, just this part of the return. And he took over $600,000 of deductions with no income. I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear that auditors said, please provide us with substantiation for these deductions, and Donald could produce none. Nonetheless, he had his longtime tax guy appeal the case. And when it got to trial, he was shown the tax return that the city of New York had. And he looked at it and said, under oath, well, that's my photocopied signature, but I didn't prepare that document. Now, there's only one other person who would have benefited from preparing that document. So assuming the lawyer is telling the truth, Donald fabricated the document and, using a photocopy machine, put his tax guy's name on it. That's pretty good evidence that there is probably tax fraud to be found, civil fraud, if not criminal, in Donald's tax returns. And that's one of the reasons that he's not going to make them available.
Now, obviously, Trump is well known as a builder of skyscrapers, but his own Trump Tower was built at a higher than necessary cost because he used the more expensive concrete construction rather than using steel. Why was that?
Well, at the time, this is now a much more common way of building, by the way. He did it because he was friends with the mob. And so while other big developers in New York were going to the FBI and going to the New York Times, where I used to report, begging that they get relief from the mob, Donald ran into their arms. Donald's lawyer and his mentor, his second father in effect, was the notorious Roy Cohn of Senator Joseph McCarthy's witch hunting staff. And he was also the lawyer for the Genovese and Gambino crime family bosses. So Donald knew that he would have labor peace at his site. When there was a strike of concrete delivery, every site in New York was affected except one, Donald Trump's. In the later racketeering trial of what the federal government said was the most violent criminal organization in American history, one of the specifics used to show a corrupt racketeering enterprise was concrete sold to another Donald Trump building, a high-rise apartment building on East 61st Street, New York. So Donald has benefited from his connections to the mob, making sure he had labor peace, making sure that his projects moved ahead smoothly, and if it makes money for him to Donald, that's all that's necessary.
Is it even possible to count the times Donald Trump has been sued for corrupt business practices or racial discrimination?
Well, technically, yes. We know there are over 4,000 suits because USA Today has been diligently trying to find them. And, you know, Donald has said, well, people get sued all the time. Yeah, they do. But lots of people go their whole career in business without ever being sued. If they do have suits, they're for things like slip and fall injuries or something connected with a workplace injury. That's not the suits Donald's getting. Donald's lawsuits are for refusal to pay the people who work for him, refusal to pay vendors, many of whom have gone out of business or been seriously damaged, especially down in the Atlantic City area because he didn't pay them. Many of them are for racial discrimination. In my book, The Making of Donald Trump, I quote the mobster Bob Labuddy, who's dead now, who, when he was losing at the Trump casinos, would spew out the most vile, racist, and sexist language, saying, yeah, I talk that way, but I don't have anything in my record at all that suggests that I discriminate against Asians, blacks, and women, which, by the way, I spent a lot of time working on. That's true. And Bob Labuddy says, Donald Trump's the guy who ordered that the blacks and the women and the Asian dealers be pulled off my tables. And when I found that out, I went crazy angry about it. And his wife and his brother-in-law, Jimmy Rosselli, the now late singer, confirmed this. So, you know, if you got a mobster named Bob Labuddy saying, you're a racist, that's pretty strong evidence.
We're speaking with David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, author of a new book called The Making of Donald Trump. If everything you know about Trump were known by the voting public, do you think it would make any difference when they vote?
Yes, I do. I mean, listen, if people after they read my book want to vote for Donald Trump, God bless them, go vote for Donald Trump. But, for example, these pastors who are going around saying Donald Trump is a fine Christian man, they should read my book. Donald Trump at length, repeatedly, and explicitly rejects the message of Christianity. In fact, he has a word for people who follow the teachings of Jesus, the Yiddish word, schmucks, which means fools and idiots. I have to assume that these televangelists and other pastors just don't know what Donald said and that he has beguiled them with his flattery. But I think if voters knew the depth and the breadth of Donald Trump's close ties with criminals of all kinds, how he put the life of an infant in jeopardy to extract revenge on his nephew over something the nephew did that was perfectly reasonable, how he revels in destroying people who he considers disloyal to him, and yet he went out of his way to show mercy to a really big cocaine trafficker who managed his helicopters and lived in his building, Trump Tower. I would hope that voters would say, what? But there's one other issue. Donald doesn't know anything. And in my book, I quote testimony he's given under oath. And one particular example is a complicated, perhaps for the radio, business issue, but I called business professors I know at Harvard and 2 other business schools and read them the question, and they said anybody who's a graduate of a business school should answer that question. One of them said they should know it the way a grammar school kid knows 2 + 2 = 4. Well, when you read my book, you will see that Donald's answer to that and other questions was gibberish. He doesn't know anything. He bluffs. That's like when he said, I know more about ISIS than the generals. Well, first of all, its correct name is ISIL. But he doesn't know more than the generals. He doesn't know anything.
Mm-hmm. You know, you're talking about the religion part of it, and you've written both about Trump's and Mike Pence, his running mate, the hypocrisy about Christianity. Pence,
right,
an evangelical, promotes government policies they're not in keeping with Christianity. What is it that people aren't getting, or are they just blocking it out and not paying attention to it? I mean, this, for a lot of people, that means a lot.
Well, I think that there's been a major breakdown of religious education in America. Mike Pence, in his state, cut off food stamps for adults, saying you should get a job. Well, right now, today, according to the state of Indiana, there are 5 adults without a job who want one for every job in Indiana. So that means 4 out of 5 of those people couldn't find work if they wanted to because it doesn't exist. But he cut off their food stamps. At the same time, under Mike Pence, the state of Indiana has given corporations over $800 million of welfare. And it's more than that. That's just what they've had to own up to in the public record. They've tried to hide a bunch of it. this is corporate socialism. They are true blue corporate socialists. And one of the reasons we have economic trouble, one of the reasons people are turning to people like Donald Trump because their personal economics are bad, is that we have massive programs the public, unless they've been reading my books, doesn't understand, that take from the many and give to the already rich few. And this destructive policy is absolutely contrary to the teachings of the Old Testament and the New. And I quote in my recent column in the Daily Beast, the Bible on, I think, 4 or 5 different points on this very point of the evil of taking from the poor to give to the king, of how things will work out badly if you give to the rich.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, do you think Donald Trump will become the 45th president of the United States?
I think that's a distinct possibility. Donald has tapped into the fact that there are a lot of Americans who really don't like the civil rights movement. They really don't like sitting next to a black person on an airplane or a brown person in a restaurant, and who are bigots about religion. I think what we're having is a test of how widespread that is. It's complicated, unfortunately, by the fact that Fox News and other phony news organizations have for years been perpetrating a huge fraud on the public. And so, there are lots of people who believe, to my utter astonishment, because they post and they call me on the phone and stuff, that Hillary Clinton goes around having people murdered. And I would say that they're crazy, except that I understand if you're in the right-wing fake news chamber, you would believe these things, even though they're baseless. So, yeah, he may get elected, and if he does, we will have a terrible crisis in the Constitution. The Republic will survive. We've survived a civil war. We'll survive Donald Trump, but it will do terrible, terrible damage to the country, and it will certainly weaken our position as a beacon of liberty and truth and human spirit.
David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, author of the new book called The Making of Donald Trump, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. David, thank you so much for your time with us. We do appreciate it and look forward to having you back again soon.
Take care.
Thank you. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Congressman Don Beyer of Virginia.
Look who's here today. Actually, right from across the river, Northern Virginia, Congressman Don Beyer from Virginia's 8th District. Good to see you, Congressman.
Thank you, Bill. It's nice to be downstairs buying coffee when I walk in.
No, seriously, we know you made a special effort to be here, and we appreciate that. Lots to talk about what's going on here just down the street in the Congress. But first, this is a big year for Virginia. Big governor's race in Virginia. How's it look?
It is competitive. It's we for a couple of years thought that the current Lieutenant Governor, Ralph Northam, who's a wonderful guy, was in the state Senate, would be the uncontested Democratic nominee. And then Tom Perriello, a very talented Virginia political leader, who'd been in the House.
Former member of Congress,
Former member of Congress, yeah, who always close to my heart because he beat Virgil Goode in 2008, who had been a Democrat and then an independent and then a Republican, and was one of these wonderfully crazy campaigners who would go buy 4 tires for his car at 4 different tire stores on the same Saturday.
Put his money where his mouth is.
And Tom got beat because he voted for the Affordable Care Act and for cap and trade. And so he's come, and he spent his intervening years at the Center for American Progress and over at the State Department. So 2 very good people. I've been for Ralph from the beginning, but whichever one wins will have a strong Democratic candidate. And it's really essential because this will be the governor who presides over the next redistricting.
Yes.
And we had a terrible redistricting in 2011, which has given us a 66-34 lower house, which doesn't look like Virginia. All 5 Virginia statewide officers are Democrats. or three governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and both senators, and yet 66-34 for the Republicans in the House, and it was 8-3 in the U.S. House until the court threw out the racial packing in Congressman Bobby Scott's 3rd district, and we got a 4th member just this year, Don McEachin.
Right. And how about, so is there any chance that you've got, let's say, Democratic governor, right, to hold on to continue the good work that Terry McAuliffe has done?
Right, exactly. Terry's been wonderful.
But I've talked to him about the problems he's got working with that legislature. Is there any chance of getting either house of the legislature back?
It's tough, Bill. The real problem in 2015, we're in those off-year elections, the odd years.
Yeah.
There were 112 incumbents that ran for the House and Senate, and 112 incumbents won. So we've got to think about doing something different.
Yes.
The good news is that 17 of those Republicans are in seats that Hillary Clinton won just in November.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not rocket science to say we've targeted all 17.
Right.
And in a perfect world, if we won 17, we'd take back the House 51-49.
Right. Now,
and by the good news is we do have candidates in all 17 too.
Yeah. So one other big issue today that impacts Virginia particularly is Donald Trump's budget cuts EPA by 31%. We just talked, your colleague Dan Kildee from Michigan was in a little bit earlier. One of the things that gets axed is the Great Lakes Restoration Project, the Puget Sound Restoration Project, and in Virginia, the Chesapeake Bay, not just Virginia, Maryland too, but for Chesapeake Bay Restoration Project.
And it's just tragic for Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, really the entire East Coast. There are folks like Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Will Baker, that have been working for a generation, 2 generations, trying to restore the bay. And for the first time in this last year, some of the scores were getting up from a D to a D plus or a D to a C minus.
Yeah.
We're finally moving in the right direction. So the oysters are coming back, the grasses are coming back. And the last thing we want to do is
the blue crabs are coming back.
Yeah, this is exciting.
I mean, you see all this improvement over time. Like, we had real problems, and we addressed them, and sometimes it costs money to fix those problems, and it just doesn't seem to matter.
No, and it's not even that much money.
Right.
And it's not partisan. We've had Republican governors. Well, Larry Hogan is good on this.
Yeah.
Bob McDonnell, other Virginia Republican governors. This has been everyone coming together to try to bring the Bay back. This is an old statistic that from when I was running for governor 20 years ago is that in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, we flush an amount of water equal to the total amount in the bay every day.
Oh, wow.
So it's very challenged, and it's not very deep water out there. So it's really tragic. The tempering news is the states are also very committed to it. So I'm assuming what Trump is after is like, okay, let Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania do it, and Mick Mulvaney can move towards his balanced budget.
Right. But, I mean, this is, as we pointed out earlier, this is the president's budget. The president's budget is not necessarily what comes out of the other end of Congress, so there's a chance to.
Yeah, thank God, because there are, we're clearly in the minority. We got 194 Democrats versus 241-ish Republicans. So we're going to have to rely on sensible Republicans on the Appropriations Committee. I'm not on it, but I've told by everyone that it's probably the most nonpartisan, the least partisan of the committees. They work together well for decades. And so people like Tom Cole from Oklahoma, Bill Simpson or Mike Simpson from Idaho, have to be the wiser heads, especially on EPA, the 31%, the 20% of their workforce, and State Department, USAID. I didn't see this morning's numbers, but they were talking 37%.
It comes out to 28% at the State Department.
28, yeah, which is all the generals now are pushing back, saying, "How many wars do you want us in?" We need diplomacy to make the world a safer place.
So what's going to happen to Paul Ryan's? We don't know whether is it Paul Ryan's plan or Donald Trump's plan or the plan. What's going to happen?
Well, I hear neither of them like having it called Trump care or Ryan care. But,
it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah. It's whereas President Obama finally said you can call it Obamacare if you want.
Sure,
it's
right.
Real.
No.
I just don't see how they pass it. I am not a fan of Senator Tom Cotton for many, many reasons, but I thought he put his finger right on the thing when he said, "Don't walk the plank," because it's going nowhere in the Senate, and the Democrats, we Democrats, are going to use it against you big time in 2018. I don't know how those 30, 40 Republicans in swing seats can stand up and say, I just voted for something that's going to knock 24 million, well, White House calculation 26 million off of health care and roll back so much of the progress. They wanted to keep the waiver of pre-existing conditions, but they don't keep it affordable. The waiver of pre-existing condition, people will be charged a premium relative to the expenses that come out. And Bill, as you know, older people are very good voters, and younger people are not so reliable voters. And this really hammers the people in the 55 to 64 range, or the 65 plus that still have health insurance. They age relate it on a 5-to-1. So I'm 66. I could pay 5 times what a 25-year-old pays, and that may be may be appropriate in terms of how much health care I'm going to use, but it's not politically very smart.
No, that's in the plan that insurance companies can charge 5 times for seniors what they charge younger people.
Yeah.
And without so I don't see how it adds up, because if you don't require everybody to buy health insurance, so basically you have young people an out, right?
Yeah.
The seniors who need it are going to have to pay 5 times as much without anybody else being in the pool.
Well,
just think of what those premiums are going to be.
The simplest idea of the Affordable Care Act was everybody has insurance, everybody pays. Very, very simple.
Yeah.
And now the Republicans have this idea about the continuous coverage, and this is the way to keep the young people on. They say that if you get off for more than X number of weeks and you try to come back on, you have to pay a 30% penalty for the first year.
Right.
But why would you come back on until you got sick? So
why would you buy it in the first place?
Yeah.
Right?
You just wait till you get sick and buy it then.
Yeah.
And pay the 30% penalty for 1 year. It's a really Bill. One of the most amazing things I read yesterday is the CBO report. Buried in it says that 17,000 additional people will die in 2018 under the Trump Care bill because of the denial of services, inability to get them. And it goes up to 29,000 people in, I think, 2025, 2026. And even weirder, someone did the math, that saves the American public $3 billion in Social Security benefits they don't have to pay out. It was the most pernicious way of thinking about it.
Right. Did you have a town hall in your district? And what are you hearing from the people in your district, particularly about the Medicaid? I think, remember Donald Trump promised he's not going to touch Social Security, not going to touch Medicare, not going to touch Medicaid. This plan does.
Yeah, we haven't done one in the last couple of weeks. We had one scheduled for Monday night, but it got snowed out.
Right.
And we have 4 more scheduled set up. But the first one we did on Martin Luther King Day, sellout crowd as not
during
as
your
expected.
break.
Yeah, and people everywhere. But the number one, and that was before the Trump Care plan had come out. But the number one question, phrased from every different perspective, was, what can I do? How can I make a difference? How can I fight back? And that's really been a very constant theme, which is why we see groups like the Resistance and Indivisible and all these candidates. We're, as Denny Heck, the member of Congress from Washington State who leads the recruitment, we are quote unquote reigning candidates. So many people have said the only way I know how to fight back is to go up, stand up and run for Congress or something.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Melvin Goodman, David Cay Johnston, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.